A young fan spots Keanu Reeves at a cafe, just sitting there, sipping his coffee. Excited but nervous, they approach him, phone in hand, hoping for a quick selfie. The crowd around notices, some smirking, others whispering. Before the fan can even say a word, a man nearby, a well-dressed businessman, scoffs. "You think he'll take a picture with you? People like him don't have time for people like you." The fan hesitates. The cafe grows silent, waiting for Keanu's response. The businessman chuckles, shaking his head. "Know your place, kid." What happens next leaves the entire cafe in stunned silence, before bursting into laughter. Keanu's response? Absolutely legendary. Stay with me till the end to see how this moment turned into something unforgettable. And hey, if you've ever met a celebrity in real life, let me know in the comments, what was your experience like? The cafe buzzed with life. It wasn't a high-end, exclusive spot, just a cozy, modern place in the middle of the city, where anyone could walk in, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy a quiet moment. The scent of freshly brewed espresso filled the air, and the soft hum of conversation created a warm, inviting atmosphere. Keanu Reeves sat alone at a small corner table, wearing his usual laid-back outfit, black jeans, a plain t-shirt, and his signature beanie. To most people, he looked just like any other regular guy, blending into the background. No bodyguards, no fancy entourage, just Keanu, lost in his own world, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. Across the cafe, a young fan, maybe in his early 20s, spotted him. His heart pounded. This was Keanu Reeves. The same Keanu whose movies he had grown up watching. The same Keanu known for being one of the kindest celebrities in Hollywood. Excitement and hesitation battled inside him. What if he was bothering him? What if Keanu said no? But then again, how often does someone get this kind of opportunity? He took a deep breath and walked forward. As he approached, a man sitting nearby noticed. He was dressed sharply, an expensive tailored suit, a designer watch gleaming on his wrist. He exuded the kind of confidence that made people assume he was important. The businessman smirked, leaning back in his chair as he watched the young fan inch closer. Just before the fan could open his mouth, the businessman let out a low chuckle. "You seriously think he's going to take a picture with you?" he said loud enough for everyone around to hear. The words cut through the air like a blade. The cafe, once filled with background noise, suddenly seemed quieter. A few customers turned their heads, curious about the unfolding interaction. The fan froze mid-step, confused. He hadn't even spoken yet. The businessman continued, shaking his head. "Guys like him don't have time for guys like you. Look at you, you look like someone who still asks his parents for money." He scoffed and took a sip of his overpriced latte. "Know your place, kid." A few people chuckled under their breath. Not necessarily because they agreed, but because they were entertained by the situation. Some exchanged glances, waiting to see how things would unfold. The fan swallowed hard. His face burned with embarrassment. He had just wanted a simple selfie. Was that so much to ask? He glanced at Keanu, unsure of what to do next. Should he just walk away? Pretend he hadn't heard anything? Keanu, however, had been listening the entire time. He slowly placed his coffee down and looked up, his dark eyes calm but observant. He had seen this kind of thing before, people belittling others to make themselves feel superior. It never failed to disappoint him. The businessman smirked, clearly enjoying the power he held over the situation. He turned to Keanu now, as if expecting him to agree. "I mean, no offense, Mr. Reeves," he said, feigning politeness, "but I'm sure you don't just take random selfies with every kid who walks up to you." The cafe held its breath. Everyone was watching. The fan, still standing awkwardly, felt like the whole world was staring at him, waiting for Keanu to confirm that, yes, he was just another nobody. But Keanu didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, a small, amused smile forming on his lips. What he said next would change everything. The silence in the cafe stretched uncomfortably. The businessman, still smirking, leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He was clearly enjoying the attention, basking in the moment as if he had just said something profound. Keanu, on the other hand, remained calm. His expression unreadable, he picked up his coffee cup, taking a slow sip before setting it down again. The young fan, now visibly tense, shifted uncomfortably. His excitement from earlier had vanished, replaced by embarrassment. A woman sitting at a nearby table whispered to her friend, "Wow, that was harsh." Another man, a few seats away, muttered, "He's not wrong though. Celebrities don't just take pictures with random people." The businessman noticed these reactions and took it as encouragement. He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "See? Even they agree. Kid, you're embarrassing yourself." The fan's fingers clenched around his phone. He could feel his ears burning, his heart pounding. He had never expected something so simple to turn into a public spectacle. He swallowed hard and looked at Keanu again, hoping, praying, for some kind of rescue from this humiliation. But Keanu still didn't say a word. Instead, he just studied the businessman with an expression of quiet amusement, as if he were watching a child throw a tantrum. The businessman, misinterpreting Keanu's silence, chuckled again. He gestured toward him. "Look at him. He's not saying anything because he doesn't want to be rude. But let's be real, do you think someone like him wastes time taking pictures with just anyone?" He glanced at Keanu again, this time speaking directly to him. "No offense, but it's true, right? I mean, you've got places to be, important people to meet." Keanu raised an eyebrow. But still, he said nothing. The businessman sighed dramatically and turned back to the fan. "Tell you what," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Instead of embarrassing yourself in front of a whole cafe, why don't I do you a favor? I'll take a picture with you. I might not be John Wick, but trust me, kid, I'm someone worth knowing." A few people laughed under their breath. The fan looked down at his phone, suddenly wishing he had never even walked up in the first place. Keanu finally moved. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and spoke in a calm, almost amused tone. "What makes someone worth knowing?" The businessman blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me? You said you're someone worth knowing. What does that mean?" Keanu repeated, tilting his head slightly. "Is it because of your suit? Your watch? The way you talk down to people?" The businessman's smirk faltered for just a second, but he quickly recovered. "Look, I'm just stating facts. The world works a certain way. People like me, people with success, money, status, we don't have time for every nobody who walks up to us." Keanu nodded slowly, as if considering his words. "Interesting." The businessman scoffed, crossing his arms. "Come on, man. You get it. You're in Hollywood. You don't stop and chat with every fan, do you?" Keanu shrugged. "I don't know. I just think people deserve to be treated with respect, no matter who they are." The businessman rolled his eyes. "That's a nice, diplomatic answer, but let's be real." But before he could finish, the barista behind the counter suddenly interrupted. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, addressing Keanu directly. She looked nervous but excited, her voice carrying across the cafe. "I just wanted to say, we really appreciate you coming in. It's an honor to have you here." The businessman frowned, looking between the barista and Keanu. "Wait, what?" Keanu smiled warmly at her. "Oh, thank you. That's really kind of you to say." The barista hesitated, glancing at the businessman before speaking again. "And I just wanted to say thank you for what you did last time. It really meant a lot." The businessman's eyes narrowed. "Last time?" Keanu chuckled softly. "She's talking about when I visited a few weeks ago. Someone in the cafe couldn't afford their meal, so I covered it for them." The businessman blinked, taken aback. He looked around at the other patrons, who were now whispering amongst themselves. The barista nodded. "Yeah. And you didn't make a big deal about it or anything. You just left before anyone could even say thank you." A murmur rippled through the cafe. The businessman's confident smirk had disappeared completely. He glanced back at Keanu, suddenly unsure of himself. Meanwhile, the young fan's eyes widened. He had always heard about Keanu's kindness, but hearing it firsthand made it feel real. The businessman swallowed, trying to regain control of the situation. He forced out a chuckle. Well, that's nice, I guess. But still, let's not pretend like. Before he could continue, the cafe door swung open, and another customer walked in, an older man in his 50s, wearing a crisp navy blue suit. He took one glance around the room and immediately spotted Keanu. His expression shifted to one of surprise and admiration. "Mr. Reeves," he said, striding forward with enthusiasm. "It's an absolute pleasure to see you again." The businessman, who had been mid-sentence, froze. His face turned pale as he recognized the newcomer. It was his boss. And his boss was now shaking Keanu's hand like they were old friends. The tension in the cafe reached its peak. The businessman sat there, completely stunned, as the realization hit him like a freight train. Keanu wasn't just some random guy drinking coffee. And in the next few moments, everyone in the cafe would find out exactly who he really was. The businessman's breath caught in his throat. His boss, was now standing in front of Keanu, beaming like he had just run into an old friend. "Mr. Reeves, what a pleasure to see you again." The older man extended his hand eagerly. Keanu, ever humble, shook his hand with a polite nod. "Good to see you too." The businessman's smug demeanor crumbled in an instant. He stiffened in his seat, his mind racing. His boss knew Keanu Reeves. Personally? Whispers spread like wildfire across the cafe. People who had been unsure before now realized exactly what was happening. "Wait, that's Keanu Reeves," someone muttered. "Oh my God, it is him," another voice gasped. A young woman pulled out her phone and started recording. The cafe, once filled with idle chatter, had turned into a scene of shock and awe. The businessman's face drained of color. He shifted uncomfortably, his confidence shattered. His mind replayed the last few minutes, his dismissive tone, his condescending smirk, the way he had ridiculed the young fan for wanting a selfie. And all of it had happened in front of Keanu Reeves. His boss turned to him, eyebrows furrowed. "What's going on here?" The businessman forced a stiff chuckle. "Oh, nothing, sir. We were just chatting." Keanu tilted his head slightly, his expression calm but piercing. "Chatting?" The businessman felt a bead of sweat forming at his temple. He knew there was no way to spin this in his favor. Not anymore. His boss gave him a sharp look before turning back to Keanu. "I had no idea you were in town. If I'd known, I would have arranged something special. You know, after everything you did for the foundation." Keanu lifted a hand, stopping him gently. "No need for that. I prefer to keep things simple." The businessman felt like the ground beneath him was crumbling. The foundation? Keanu had done something for the foundation? His boss turned back to him, this time with an unimpressed frown. "I assume you knew who you were talking to?" The businessman opened his mouth, but no words came out. Keanu, still composed, glanced at the young fan who had been humiliated moments earlier. "I believe he just wanted a picture." His voice was even, but there was something underneath it, a quiet power that made the businessman's stomach twist. His boss turned to him with a look of sheer disappointment. "You turned down a simple request from Keanu Reeves? And then, belittled someone for asking?" The businessman stammered, I didn't realize." His boss shook his head in disbelief. "Didn't realize? You just assumed. And in doing so, you embarrassed not only yourself, but me." The businessman swallowed hard. The weight of his actions pressed down on him like a heavy stone. Keanu, however, simply offered a small smile. He turned to the young fan and gestured toward him. "How about that picture now?" The fan, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly snapped back to reality. His hands trembled as he held up his phone. "Why yeah. Of course." Keanu leaned in, smiling warmly as the fan snapped a quick selfie. The cafe erupted into whispers and quiet applause. People who had been indifferent before were now watching Keanu with admiration. The businessman, still seated, could only stare at the scene unfolding before him. The power dynamic had completely shifted, and he was now the one sitting in uncomfortable silence. His boss exhaled sharply. "We'll talk about this later." And just like that, the businessman's fate was sealed. The cafe remained unusually quiet, the weight of the moment settling over everyone. The businessman, now completely stripped of his earlier arrogance, sat motionless, his mind racing. His boss's disappointed stare burned into him, but the real sting came from within. He had made a fool of himself, not just in front of his employer, but in front of Keanu Reeves. Keanu, however, showed no signs of anger. There was no smirk of triumph, no condescending look. Instead, he simply turned to the businessman with a calm expression, his gaze steady but not unkind. "I get it," Keanu said finally, breaking the silence. "We all make mistakes." The businessman swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to respond, to explain himself, but what could he possibly say? Keanu continued, his voice even. "But the real question is, what do you do after?" The words hit the businessman like a hammer. What do you do after? It wasn't about what had already happened, it was about what he would do next. The businessman lowered his gaze. He took a deep breath, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong." The young fan, still holding his phone tightly, looked over in surprise. The cafe patrons, once passive spectators, now leaned in, curious to see what would happen next. Keanu gave a small nod. He wasn't the kind to humiliate someone further when they were already down. Instead, he extended his hand. "Then let's move forward." The businessman stared at the outstretched hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried so much weight. Keanu wasn't asking for an apology, he was offering a chance for redemption. With hesitation, the businessman reached out and shook Keanu's hand. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice more sincere than it had been all day. Keanu smiled slightly. "It's not about saying sorry. It's about being better." The businessman nodded slowly, understanding what he meant. His boss, who had been watching intently, let out a quiet sigh. "Well, this has been an eye-opening experience." He turned to Keanu. "I appreciate your patience. Not everyone would have handled this the way you did." Keanu simply shrugged. "Kindness doesn't cost anything." The businessman looked toward the young fan, regret clear in his eyes. He knew that an apology alone wouldn't erase what had happened, but he had to start somewhere. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice softer. "I shouldn't have treated you like that. It wasn't fair." The young fan hesitated, then gave a small nod. "I just wanted a picture." The businessman exhaled, then surprised everyone. "How about this, I take the picture for you?" The young fan's eyes widened. "Really?" Keanu grinned. "Why not?" The businessman took the phone from the kid, adjusting the angle before snapping the perfect shot. The moment felt symbolic, one of humility, of learning, of redemption in its own way. The cafe, once a place of judgment, now felt different. Warmer. People exchanged glances, some smiling, others nodding in approval. As Keanu prepared to leave, he turned back to the businessman one last time. "Next time, don't judge so fast." The businessman nodded, his expression one of genuine reflection. Keanu patted his shoulder lightly before walking toward the exit. The young fan watched him go, his face still lit with excitement. And just like that, Keanu Reeves had left, not with anger, not with revenge, but with a lesson that would stay with everyone in that cafe long after he was gone. As Keanu stepped toward the exit, a small voice suddenly called out from the side of the cafe. "Excuse me, sir." Keanu turned, along with the businessman and several onlookers. A young girl, no older than 8, stood near a table with her mother. She clutched a tiny notebook in her hands, her fingers nervously curling around the edges. The mother gave her a reassuring nod, encouraging her to speak. "I just wanted to say, you're really nice," the little girl said shyly, her voice barely above a whisper. "My dad says people change when they get rich and famous. But you didn't." The cafe fell silent again, but this time, it wasn't out of tension, it was admiration. Keanu crouched down so he was at eye level with the girl, offering her a warm smile. "Your dad is right. Some people do change," Keanu said gently. But you know what really matters? The girl shook her head. Who you choose to be, no matter what happens. The girl's face lit up, as if she had just received the most important lesson of her life. The businessman, standing nearby, swallowed hard. The words hit him in a way he wasn't expecting. Who you choose to be. The young fan, who had taken the picture earlier, suddenly stepped forward as well. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled movie ticket. This is from the first movie I ever watched of yours, the boy said, offering it with both hands. I've kept it for years. Keanu took the ticket carefully, running his fingers over the worn-out edges. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a memory, a connection, a reminder of why he did what he did. Thank you, Keanu said sincerely. This means a lot. At that moment, the businessman glanced at his reflection in the cafe's glass window. He didn't like what he saw, not because of his appearance, but because of who he had been just moments ago. He took a deep breath and, without hesitation, pulled out his wallet. Here, he said, handing some cash to the young fan. Go watch his next movie. My treat. The boy's eyes widened. Really? The businessman gave a small nod. Consider it a fresh start, for both of us. Keanu watched the exchange, a knowing smile on his face. Sometimes, change happened in the smallest moments. And sometimes, those moments could change everything. As Keanu stepped outside the cafe, the air felt lighter, like the weight of an unspoken lesson had settled on everyone inside. The businessman stood by the door, still processing everything. Keanu turned back one last time and said, you know, kindness doesn't cost anything. But arrogance? That can cost you everything. The businessman lowered his head, nodding slowly. I get that now, he admitted. The young fan and the little girl waved as Keanu walked away, their eyes still shining with admiration. The cafe, once filled with judgment and tension, was now filled with something else, reflection. The businessman, lost in thought, sat back down. He reached for his untouched coffee, but something inside him had changed. The way he saw people, the way he saw himself. At the end of the day, respect wasn't about wealth or status. It was about character. And sometimes, the most powerful lessons come from the people you least expect. So, the next time you see someone and assume you know their worth based on what they wear, where they sit, or how much money they have, pause. Because you never know who you're really standing next to. What do you think? Have you ever misjudged someone, only to realize later how wrong you were? Let us know in the comments. And remember, kindness always wins.